What is up guys, this is Fight Squad and we're back again with another video. Top 10 biggest rivalries in MMA. Stay tuned. Rivalries not just in MMA but in any sports is a fascinating aspect of this sport. The trash talking, visible emotion, increase in tension, pushing and shoving and even brawls during the build-ups are what fuel the excitement for passionate fans. Being a comic sport, the press conferences and build-up to the fights are confrontational more often than not. More than mere words are needed to make a great rivalry though. Here is our list of top 10 biggest rivalries in MMA. Before we start the video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. And now, let's start the video. Number 10. Cody No Love Garbrandt vs TJ Dillashaw. This is one of the most personal rivalry in UFC fueled by hatred. The story begins way back in 2021 when former UFC fighter Duane Ludwig gets announced as new coach for Team Alpha Male, a gym filled with talented fighters such as TJ Dillashaw, Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, and a young phenom Cody Garbrandt. But in just 2 years due to personal tensions, Ludwig departed from the group, which created a certain buzz in the MMA world as the news went public. On 24th of May 2014, Dillashaw won an impressive fight over Renan Barão and captured a bantamweight title. Although he was still part of the Alpha Male, Dillashaw was still training under Ludwig. On the 22nd successful season of The Ultimate Fighter, when Conor McGregor and Uriah Faber were the active coaches of the Team Alpha Male, the Mystic Mac famously referred Dillashaw as a snake in the grass, as the Irishman's comments were going viral. A few months later, Dillashaw announced that he would be leaving the group to train full-time with Dane Ludwig in Colorado. The remaining members of the Alpha Male weren't too pleased with this announcement, especially Cody Garbrandt. Garbrandt flew through the ranks and quickly became the bantamweight champion with a dominant win over Dominic Cruz. The stage was set for a brilliant match versus Dillashaw. The first sign of beef was when Dillashaw tweeted that he made Garbrandt cry in training, and Garbrandt replied saying he has sparring footage of him knocking TJ out. This considerable tension would continue in the 25th season of The Ultimate Fighter, where they would be the designated coaches. This season experienced some of the most physical and aggressive moments in the show's extensive history. These two went at it at the very beginning and nearly came to blows at each encounter. Dillashaw came back from being knocked down in the first round to knocking out Garbrandt in the second round of UFC 213. Number 9. Anderson Silva vs Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen earned his spot to face Anderson Silva by defeating Nate Marquardt at UFC 109. This would go on to be one of the most interesting rivalries that the MMA fans had seen in years. Sonnen wasn't seen as a serious threat to Silva, who was already widely regarded as the best MMA champion in history by then. However, Sonnen's verbal tirades on the champion had folks tuning in, and the American didn't disappoint inside the octagon, repeatedly taking Silva down. Sonnen was on his way to a massive upset in the 5th round. However, with less than 2 minutes remaining, Silva locked up a triangle choke that would extend his championship reign. It was a rough loss for Sonnen to swallow, but the performance made his trash talk that much more believable when he was booked to meet Silva again around 2 years later. Although Sonnen upped his promotional game leading up to the rematch with Silva, he didn't perform nearly as well inside the cage the second time around. In the second round, Silva landed a knee to Sonnen's body that ended the rivalry for good. A Sonnen win would have helped to add on to this rivalry, but nonetheless this rivalry helped shape the middleweight division for years to come. Number 8. Brock Lesnar vs Frank Mir. After Brock Lesnar departed from WWE and announced to compete in the MMA again, the UFC fan communities were blown away with excitement and what he had in store. Lesnar kicked off his MMA career with Minsu in Japan and made his UFC debut against Frank Mir. Lesnar was caught with a knee bar from Mir at UFC 81. This started a feud between the heavyweights, leading to a historic UFC 100 fight card. In their second meeting, Lesnar stopped Mir with ground and pound to become the undisputed heavyweight champion. Number 7. Chuck Liddell vs Randy Couture. The rivalry between Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture isn't considered to be the most heated in MMA standards, but a trilogy of fights have certainly booked its place amongst fans' hearts. The rivalry began under T's contract dispute, as the Huntington Beach bad boy was not interested in a fight with former teammate Liddell. So the UFC decided to book a fight between Liddell and Couture for an interim championship, while it negotiated with Ortiz. Couture gave Ortiz his wish by stopping Liddell in the 3rd round. The Natural then went on to become the undisputed 205-pound champion by beating Ortiz on the scorecards. After an unsuccessful run in the 2003 Pride Middleweight Grand Prix, Liddell returned to the octagon to begin his march toward a rematch with Couture. Knockouts against Ortiz and Vernon White were enough to earn the Iceman a second meeting. With a knockout in the 1st round, Liddell's time finally came on the UFC 52, where one of the best lightweight heavyweight title reigns in MMA history began. At that point, Couture already had a strong place in MMA history, but he was far from done at 205 pounds. A win over Mike Van Arsdale earned Couture a rubber match with Liddell, while Couture went on to suffer another knockout loss to Liddell. He made sure he was a big part of one of MMA's great rivalry. Number 6. Ronda Rousey vs. Miesha Tate. If it weren't for the bad blood between Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate, women's MMA probably wouldn't be where it is today. The classic rivalry between the two female MMA fighters began under the Strikeforce banner. Ronda Rousey at that time had just 4 fights under her belt, and consequently Tate didn't see Rousey as a deserving challenger. Tate wouldn't have to wait long to know what Rousey deserved, as Ronda badly twisted Tate's arm before the 1st round came to an end and won the fight with submission. When Tate lost to Kat Zingano in her UFC debut, it looked as though a rematch would have to wait. However, a Zingano injury opened the door for Tate to coach opposite Rousey on the Ultimate Fighter, which only increased the dislike between the female bantamweights had for one another. At UFC 168, Ronda Rousey locked up Tate's arm once more to settle the dust once and for all. Number 5. Gilbert Melendez vs. Josh Thompson. This is one of the best rivalries that took place entirely outside of the octagon. These fighters met 3 times for Strikeforce lightweight titles and engaged in a memorable trilogy that is written in the history books. After losing to Guida in the first ever 155-pound title bout under the Strikeforce banner, it took Thompson 6 straight wins to get another crack at the belt. By then, Melendez had dethroned Guida and defended his championship. Making the most of a second chance, Thompson defeated Melendez on the scorecards. Unfortunately, a broken leg prevented a Punk from defending his championship, and Melendez went on to capture an interim title while he awaited Thompson's return for a match. When Thompson did return, he lost some ground to Melendez. The rematch went down in December 2009, and El Nino was able to respond with a decision that leaned his way. It took Thompson more than 2 years to earn his rubber match with Melendez, but the wait was worth it. In what was the final Strikeforce appearance for both men, Melendez and Thompson battled to the end. Ultimately, Melendez walked away with a split decision win to take a lead in the series. This is one of the best trilogy MMA fans have seen over the years, and certainly one for the history books. Number 4. Conor McGregor vs. Nate Diaz. Everywhere Conor McGregor steps, controversy follows. The Irishman is famed for his trash talks and an outspoken character, and when Mr. Mac was paired with another brash athlete, Nate Diaz, altercation was bound to happen. After Rafael Dos Anjos pulled out of the scheduled fight with McGregor, the UFC organized a short-notice fight between McGregor and Diaz at 170 pounds for UFC 196. Both fighters usually fought at 155, but were willing to go up due to the short-notice timeline for Diaz. At UFC on Fox 17, after Diaz defeated Michael Johnson, he made a famous call out McGregor. Instead of answering Joe Rogan's question, he says,
"How do you feel about it?"
Yeah, Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for, mother. I'm gonna fight you right here. Hey, and I'm not.
Unfortunately, we can't talk like that on Fox.
This teardown after the UFC 196 official press conference started things off pretty well. When both men came towards each other, Diaz put out his arm blocking McGregor's face, and the Irishman didn't hesitate by swiftly punching it away. Security was holding both teams back from brawling immediately after. The build-up for this fight was some of the greatest trash talk and overall entertainment that UFC fans have ever witnessed prior to a fight. These two fighters went on from seemingly not caring about each other's businesses to being actual enemies on a matter of days. The build-up continued with fierce animosity and a back-and-forth interviews and small press conferences. This included the remarkable interview on Fox and a business channel interview on CNBC. Their last meeting was a press conference held for the two of them only. McGregor was his boisterous self, while Diaz did not seem to care the slightest. At UFC 196, Diaz shocked the world by submitting McGregor in the second round via rear naked choke. McGregor asked for an immediate rematch, and due to the considerable interest of the fans and Diaz's apparent willingness, it was scheduled for UFC 202. A pre-fight conference was already held for UFC 202 on August 17th. McGregor showed up extremely late, and as soon as Diaz walked out. As he did, he flipped off Conor, and when this happened, McGregor and Diaz's team started throwing monster cans and water bottles at each other from opposing sides of the auditorium. The rematch was delivering increased levels of excitement to the fans. It was a key event the consuming public was waiting eagerly for. At UFC 202, McGregor and Diaz put in a back-and-forth classic. The notorious edge-out of split decision in what was deemed by fans and analysts as one of the greatest UFC fights of all time. This was one of the bloodiest rivalries in UFC history, and certainly one that attracted newer generation of MMA fans. Number 3. Georges St. Pierre vs. Matt Hughes. The trilogy of fights between Georges St. Pierre and Matt Hughes is considered by many to be the best rivalry in UFC without trash talking. With wins over Karo Parisyan and Jay Heron in his first 2 UFC appearances, St. Pierre looked to be the future of the 170-pound division. The problem was he had to get through one of the best ever before he could sit atop the welterweight class. At UFC 50, Hughes showed that the Canadian wasn't quite ready. In the closing seconds of the first round, St. Pierre was trapped in an armbar and had to tap. In order to get a second crack at Hughes, St. Pierre needed to pick up 4 more UFC wins, including a decision victory over Penn. By the time St. Pierre met Hughes for a second time, he had developed into the best in the division, as he stopped Hughes with a head kick in the second round. St. Pierre then suffered a shocking loss to Matt Serra. With Serra unable to defend his belt though, St. Pierre and Hughes clashed for a third time with an interim championship on the line at UFC 79, in a finish that nearly mirrored their first meeting. St. Pierre locked up an armbar on Hughes in the closing moments of the second stanza. St. Pierre then went on to regain the title and hasn't suffered a defeat since his loss to Serra. This is arguably the match that shifted the welterweight division to a new dimension. Number 2. John Bones Jones vs. Daniel DC Cormier. Did you know that one of the bloodiest rivalries in UFC began with a harmless joke? If Jones is to be believed, he had approached promotional newcomer Daniel Cormier behind the scenes of a UFC event in 2010, with the intention of developing a friendship with a former Olympic wrestler. Jones claimed that he had not known who Cormier was, but was intrigued to talk to him upon hearing how good he was from his coaches. Cormier was apparently upset at the suggestion that a fledgling light heavyweight didn't know who he was, and at the suggestion that he could take him down. Cormier took it as an insult. Just 1 year later, Jones had won a title, and Cormier had dropped down to light heavyweight from heavyweight. And when Alexander Gustafsson pulled out of a scheduled rematch with Jones at UFC 182, Cormier stepped in. The press conference of this fight was staged in the lobby of MGM Grand in Las Vegas and went pretty well, until the photo up at the end. Jones walked across the stage, took his shades off, and pushed his head into Cormier's face. This provoked a reaction from DC, who then showed him. Jones dropped the strap he had over his shoulder and threw a punch that sparked a brawl that culminated in Cormier throwing a shoe at him. They both went back and forth, where Jones gave a death threat to Cormier after DC said he would spit in his face. Jones was fined by the Nevada State Athletic Commission and earned community service for his part in melee. Unfortunately, Jones got injured for that scheduled fight, and the UFC naturally had to postpone. Their first bout instead took place at UFC 182 at the MGM Grand. It was a close back and forth fight, but Jones was able to score a unanimous decision. Notwithstanding, during the bout, the anger was apparent, as after each bell rang to the end of the round, the two would continue throwing punches. After this win, a rematch was scheduled multiple times. However, due to consistent injuries from Cormier, the hit-and-run accident from Jones, and then the testing of banned substances from Jones, it took longer than expected. While this was happening, the Twitter verbal sparring continued, with Cormier repeatedly calling out Jones for his poor actions outside of the octagon. At UFC 214, the two men ultimately had their rematch, where Jones would win by a third-round TKO. While many might argue that the Jones-Cormier rivalry is the biggest in history, but because of the sheer popularity and feud, we have given the biggest rivalry badge to the next rivalry in our list. Number 1. The notorious Conor McGregor vs. Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov. The rivalry between the Irish hard-hitter and the Russian bear didn't take too much time to ignite. In such a short period of time, this rivalry gained massive popularity among fans. The build-up to this historic lightweight match created buzz around the MMA world that was never seen before. Many believe that this match alone gave UFC so much popularity that it couldn't have had in any years. Their initial sign of tension started in 2016. In November, at UFC 205 weigh-ins, the men had an altercation backstage. The lightweights saw each other from either side and started exchanging words before they were separated by security. After this, the men would continually jab at each other on Twitter on various occasions. 2 years later, Khabib formally called out McGregor after Tony Ferguson pulled out of their scheduled fight at UFC 223. This is when the beef started heating up. A few days later, a video would surface that showed a dispute between Khabib and Conor's training partner, Nurmagomedov. That same day, UFC President Dana White announced that McGregor would be stripped of his official title for inactivity. The next day, after the UFC 223 media day ended, McGregor and a group of training partners and friends instantly rushed to the Barclays Center to get revenge for Khabib's altercation with Labov. They instantly started hollering at Khabib, who was in a UFC bus full of fighters, cussing him out and slamming the windows. When he didn't come out, McGregor threw a metal dolly that shattered the windows. Dana White later said to the ESPN, "This is the most disgusting thing that has ever happened in the company." McGregor was later arraigned with his teammate for his violent actions. After many court dates, McGregor willingly accepted a plea deal in which he pleaded guilty for disorderly conduct. This meant the Irishman could continue fighting in the United States, and a fight was on. The much-anticipated fight was scheduled for UFC 229 at the T-Mobile Arena. A press conference was scheduled on September 20th for just the two fighters, with no crowd and just reporters. The event was extremely hostile and felt more personal than most fights. McGregor showed profound disgust for Nurmagomedov's family and religion, while getting into a personal feud with his manager, Ali Abdelaziz. The ego continued to be focused and disinterested throughout the conference. The talk was finally done and these two men were eager to hurt each other severely. Nurmagomedov said in the week prior that he wanted to change his face. At UFC 229, Nurmagomedov outmatched McGregor for the majority of the fight and carefully finished him in the 4th round by submission. When he won, he instantly jumped the cage and started a brawl with McGregor's team. Inside the cage, Nurmagomedov's team and McGregor exchanged punches before the security could hold everyone off. This truly revealed how personal this rivalry between the two really was. McGregor has stated he wants a rematch desperately, whereas Nurmagomedov doesn't think he justly deserves it. This was one of the most anticipated and thrilling contests that the MMA world has ever seen. Thank you for watching and make sure to subscribe, like, comment, share this to your friends and hit the notification bell to watch more of our videos. Stay awesome and see you next time.